have prepared a very detailed guide for the new Legendary and Dragonheir Silent Gods. It's the Dungeons & Dragons collaboration. It's Elminster Aumar. Now, where should you use him? What gear should you put on him? What stats should you focus on? What team can you build around him? In this video, I'm going to share all of that with you and more. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't been playing Dragonheir Silent Gods, I'm going to tell you how you can download the game. But if you've been following my videos, you can use the timestamps to jump ahead right to the different portions of the guide you're interested in. Now, if you haven't been playing Dragonheir Silent Gods, I've been playing for almost, I think, 6+ months now, and you can use the link in the description to download the game if you haven't already downloaded it. Using that link does in fact support the channel, and this video has been sponsored by the makers of Dragonheir Silent Gods. The game is available on Android, iOS, on Mac, on PC via the Epic Games Store and Steam, and it is cross-platform, so you can be playing on your PC, then playing on your phone, which is something that I like to do. And this is just the second of the Dungeons & Dragons collaborations that have happened so far. I hope there will be more of them looking into the future. So consider downloading now, lock in your Elminster Aumar for your collection, and let's jump into the guide. Oh, and by the way, if you're looking for a code, I'll have a link in the description as well. You can enter that redeem code, get some extra goodies when you download the game. So moving on to Elminster Aumar, we're going to be talking about how he works, the gear, and so on. And this is the same sort of guide I put together for Drizzt Do'Urden, who was the first Dungeons & Dragons collaboration that took place in Dragonheir Silent Gods. Now, let's very quickly remind ourselves of what his skills do. And we covered most of this in my last video for how to unlock him and some basic information about the event and his kit. But let's review this very briefly. First of all, he does have a captain aura. It gives all his allies 60 enlightenment in all battles. Now, this can be really good if you pair him with enlightenment-based teams like Flora or a wild composition or even a legendary necrosis team with Premsa or Gaiolier, since derivative damage scales with enlightenment. Next up is the passive skill, which reads that for each debuff onto an enemy, Elminster gains 10 resistance, and he gets up to 10 stacks, so that's 100 total resistance, which can be really good in scenarios where you need to avoid having debuffs stacked, like, for example, Thay Meander or some Chief Challenge bosses that have some really devastating debuffs. Now, Elminster's battle skill grants an enlightenment-based shield to all allies in a 5x5 area for 5 seconds, as well as control immunity for 5 seconds. Now, that 5x5 area is very, very, very important to keep in mind. I found that when I used Elminster Aumar too far in the back, he wouldn't be shielding my front line, which is actually where I wanted my shielding to be focused, depending on what fight you're doing, right? So you want to position Elminster Aumar to take advantage of this battle skill, depending on either who you think in your team needs the shield, or to position him in a way that even when your front line runs forward, you're still shielding the whole team, which is something that I played around with, and I'll probably have some footage where you see I mess around with that in this video. Now, some of the footage from this video is going to be from my account. Some of the footage from this video is actually from a test account where I got to use Elminster Aumar, and I brought him to the 3rd tier of inspiration. And I mean, like, the dude is a powerhouse. Now, keep in mind with this shield that the duration can be increased to 6.5 seconds if you use the new artifact with him. So you can actually get a little bit more shielding value with that synergy. Now, lastly, his ultimate does damage in a diamond-shaped area of effect. This scales off of his enlightenment and also attack. I mean, he also applies a accuracy penalty and attack penalty too to all targets in the AoE. Dude, to sum it up, he's a beast. He's very, very good. He's got important debuffs, as well as a really solid buff, control immunity, on a very short cooldown because it's his battle skill. So overall, just an extremely powerful kit. And I did predict that a fire support like Elminster Aumar would be wicked to have. And like, yes, it is. It is as good as I thought it could and could have hoped it would be. So now that we've covered his kit, what gear and stats should you be prioritizing for Elminster Aumar? Well, you definitely want to stack as much enlightenment as possible, mainly as a main stat for your chest piece, as well as for your positive rune. Your gloves and negative rune should be attack percentage and attack. And look for those same 3 stats across the board as your substats. So like as much as possible, you want to be getting enlightenment and attack percent as substats on some of those other pieces. And it is really important to make sure that you have enough accuracy throughout your stats to suit whatever it is that you're doing. The most important, or the most you will need, is actually by the end of the season, it's around 320. But you also are going to get a lot of buffs, whether it's from your affinity tree or Chaos Shadows buff, to make up for some of that accuracy. So it doesn't all have to come from your equipment. And early on in the season, you will most likely need to rely on an accuracy chess piece and a negative rune. Later on, you can rely more on your substats. But if you're still lacking, you can swap the negative rune to accuracy as well. And you should look for these stats in either 3-piece Cyril's Whisper or 3-piece Mona Lisa's Blessing. You should prioritize Cyril's Whisper, but if you already have someone else that can use that set, you could opt for the Mona Lisa's Blessing instead. And if you're still in Season 1, you can use the 3-piece Radiance set. Now, in terms of artifacts, ideally you should be using the one that you got from the event with Elminster Aumar, but you also have at the epic tier one artifact that is the Tiara. It increases the shield amount of the wearer and also has enlightenment as one of its stats. So like great synergy with Elminster Aumar. This is definitely a solid epic alternative if you aren't getting the new artifact that is released with Elminster Aumar. And since you're probably already building accuracy on him, you could opt for either Witch's Remains or a Crown of the Unclean as a way to apply the defense down debuff. Witches specifically could work really nicely because it is applied to a group of enemies, whereas Crown is only a single target. But I highly advise you use a multi-hitting ultimate as your defense down holder, so there's a higher chance of applying the debuff. Now finally, where should you use Elminster Aumar once you've knocked out the equipment that you've got on him? And what teams should you look to make with him? Elminster is honestly very versatile and doesn't really require anything specific to work with. You can put him into many different teams. If you run a wild team from Season 1, you could pair with, like, for example, Tonalnan and any other wild heroes you've managed to summon. Elminster will be a great fit to provide some sustain and very crucial debuffs. In Season 1, you also get access to the Fire and Poison affinity, which is very good for Elminster to make use of his passive. Poison can stack up to 40 on a single target, where you can refresh those stacks using Corrin, although you're going to need the Rift Hourglass artifact along with 75 skill haste on top of that, but you can guarantee to keep Elminster's passive permanently active, which is really good. So any poison team that requires a support, don't be afraid to toss Elminster into that lineup. He's also insanely good for PvP. Control is one of the most crucial effects when it comes to PvP, and because of how fast-paced the current meta is, being able to stun or charm some important heroes in any lineup can absolutely sway the fight in your favor or in your enemy's favor. But with Elminster having control immunity, and this comes from his battle skill, he can get that active before most ultimate skills are up and running. This helps tremendously. Not to mention, by the way, that having the AoE attack penalty is always a good thing to have in your kit for your team. Now, when it comes to PvE, I'd recommend using him in pretty much every dungeon except the Goblin Lair and Ancient Battlefield. And I have some footage where I was running him in the Goblin Lair, and I did fine. But you've basically got a bunch of problems with the Goblin Lair. First of all, Elminster is going to be split up from his team. So, if you were actually trying to shield your team, that's not going to happen because the front line is just going to be way in front and he's going to be way in the back. So you're only really shielding your back line at that point, and they may not even need a shield. But second of all, we're talking about the Goblin Lair, the thing you really wanted was lots of damage. And he's fine, but I don't know. I think you've got some better options for how to do that. Now, I did actually beat the highest tier of the Goblin Lair using a team that I would say is not actually optimal for going through and doing that, but this was on the test server and the team is pretty cracked. So, yes, as you can see on your screen, it will do okay. It will get there, even on auto, but I would not recommend him for that. Now, the reason I don't think he's amazing for the Ancient Battlefield is that it really hurts you to bring heroes that are giving buffs. But for the rest of the dungeons and even the story missions, like Meander, or Pillar, Elminster will do really solid as a core support unit for any Fire or Poison lineup in Season 1 or Fire Necrosis lineup in Season 2, and presumably, right, like whatever lineups we get into future seasons. I have a hard time imagining that Elminster is not going to be a part of a team that I want to make. He's awesome, man. Now, I did take him to a bunch of graves while I was on the test server, and I was able to get some wins on level 9 of a couple of the graves, but I think it was the Grave of Rot where I ultimately kind of got chowed down on with the team that I brought. So should you invest in Elminster Aumar? I mean, if you're a pure free-to-play, because of the scarcity of dice, you could consider sticking to the Heliolite banner instead, because while Elminster is a really solid hero, there are other heroes that can be very, very account changing, on top of the fact that you have some higher chances of actually pulling a legendary. But if you are spending a small amount or a medium amount, like the Battle Pass, for example, some special offers maybe, stuff like that, I would highly recommend the 25 or so dice that it's going to take to get Elminster Aumar. He is probably going to become a staple for a lot of lineups, especially if you're missing a hero like Chrysos, who is just a really solid alternative. Elminster Aumar is awesome. I mean, and I would say, reflecting back on the addition of Drizzt and Elminster, the contribution I think Elminster is going to be making to my lineup moving forward is, unfortunately for Drizzt, just going to be bigger and more significant. So if you enjoyed this vid, consider throwing a like on here and subscribing to the channel. If you haven't yet downloaded Dragonheir Silent Gods, definitely check the link in the description. Big thank you again to the makers of the game for sponsoring today's video. You definitely want to get your hands on Elminster Aumar. I am hoping for more D&D collaborations. This one, for me, really heated up the value of the event, and I really enjoyed playing it as well. I also really like the art on the Dragoliches. Those are pretty freaking sweet. If you didn't see that, I covered it in my prior video. So if you get to the end of this one, you're like, whoa, 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 please give me more information about the unlock process. Card in the end screen for that one. Alternatively, if you want more information about the lore for Elminster Aumar, I covered that in my predictions video, where I literally called the shot. I was like, fire support would be dope. Card in the end screen. I talk about why it is that I hoped he would potentially be a fire support, cover his lore, and hey, hit the nail on the head. Check that one out. Until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.